Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Amy controls Bootlegger Stash and Blood Sun. Can she tap a non-basic land she controls to make a treasure token? Alright, first of all, let's observe that the activated ability that Bootlegger Stash gives your lands does not qualify as a mana ability. Even though it makes a treasure token and treasure tokens can make mana, it doesn't directly add mana to your mana pool. And that is one of the conditions that you would need to meet in order to be considered to be a mana ability. Therefore, the Blood Sun would be able to remove this ability just like it would be able to remove any other ability that's not a mana ability. So, would it? And in order to answer that question, we're going to need to know a little bit about how continuous effects work. So, usually with continuous effects, the first thing that you need to look at is something called layers. Continuous effects get sorted into different layers based on the sort of thing that they do. And the relative order of the layers is always static. So that means that continuous effects that belong to one layer are always going to be applied before any continuous effects that belong to any subsequent layer, no matter what order the cards involved might have entered the battlefield. Of course, in this situation, the layers concept isn't super duper helpful, and that's because the continuous effects from the Bootlegger Stash and the Blood Sun both want to add or remove abilities from permanents, and that's all part of layer 6. So because these both apply in the same layer, we're stuck going back to timestamps. In other words, which one entered the battlefield first. So that would mean that if Blood Sun entered the battlefield first, then it would strip away all the abilities from the non-basic lands before the Bootlegger Stash gave the ability to make a treasure token. On the other hand, if the Bootlegger Stash entered the battlefield first, then that would mean that it would give the ability to make a treasure token first, only to have Blood Sun strip that ability away a little bit later. Now that we've got that answered, let's take a look at a related but slightly different scenario. We're going to transition from day into night and consider what would happen if we combined a Blood Moon with Bootlegger Stash. So, unlike in the previous situation, the Blood Moon has a slightly different kind of continuous effect. Notice that it turns all non-basic lands into mountains. This would be a type, subtype, or supertype changing effect, and that means that this effect would be applied in layer 4, rather than layer 6, which is when ability adding and removing happens. Because Blood Moon belongs to an earlier layer, that means its continuous effect always applies first, regardless of what order those two permanents entered the battlefield. So, in this case, we would always have the ability to tap to create a treasure token on all the non-basic lands that you control, because the Bootlegger Stash belongs to a later layer, and so therefore it puts that ability on after Blood Moon has done its job. Now, I know that a lot of people are probably thinking right now, hold on a second. If Blood Moon only changed non-basic lands into mountains, then nobody would bother playing this card at all. You're not even talking about the important thing that Blood Moon does, which is that it takes away all the abilities from the lands that it affects. So if that's the case, why does this situation work any differently from the Blood Sun example, where the Blood Sun also did the exact same thing, that being taking away all the abilities from the non-basic lands that it affects? And that's a really interesting question. In order to answer that, we're going to need to take a close look at exactly what Blood Moon's continuous effect does. So if you read the card, Blood Moon does exactly what it says on the tin. It takes all the non-basic lands and it turns them into mountains. Now, if you've already played Magic before with this card, you probably know that that entails making them lose all of their abilities and gaining tap to add red. However, the mechanism is a little bit different from the way that we did it with the Blood Sun. As you can see in that rule, if you have a land and change its land's type to one of the basic land types, in this case mountain, then one of the things that the rules does behind the scenes is it takes away all the abilities that land used to have and it puts on the ability to tap for red. And so because this is a game rule that's doing this rather than a continuous effect, it doesn't apply in the continuous effect layers. Rather, it happens immediately as the land type is gained. It's something that the game does in the background anytime a land gains a basic land type. And so, because of that, it is not going to apply in layer 6, which is when we might think that ability adding and removing should be happening. Rather, it's going to apply in layer 4 immediately as the land's type gets changed to being a mountain. And so that's the reason why the Bootlegger Stash manages to win out in this scenario. It's because the Blood Moon does all of the stuff that it does in layer 4, which is an earlier layer than the layer that the Bootlegger Stash applies in, layer 6. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.